The moment Doug returned, the air seemed to shift, dense and heavy with anticipation. He had been absent for months, a ghost drifting out of their lives, giving Joey and Vanessa the false comfort of safety, of invincibility. They had believed that distance and secrecy could erase his presence, that their meticulous plotting would remain undiscovered. But Doug's return was not simply a disruption, it was the embodiment of inevitability, a reckoning that arrived with the precision of a predator. Every step he took through the hallways of their carefully constructed sanctuary radiated authority, a silent warning that the delicate web of deceit they had spun was about to collapse with a force they had neither anticipated nor prepared for. Joey's mind raced as he tried to calculate the limits of Doug's awareness, the extent to which he had seen through their scheme. Every miscalculation, every assumption, every tiny indulgence in their plotting now became a potential vector for exposure. He could feel the walls of their world shrinking, the corners where they had hidden becoming cages. Vanessa, equally shaken, struggled with the sudden, visceral understanding that their cleverness had never guaranteed safety, it had only guaranteed attention, scrutiny, and now, impending retribution. She felt a cold knot tighten in her chest, a mixture of fear, rage, and disbelief that Doug had returned with the singular purpose of dismantling the future they had so arrogantly envisioned. Doug's presence was not just a physical one, it carried with it a weight that settled over the room like an unrelenting fog. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to reason away, impossible to pretend did not exist. The knowledge that he had discovered the depths of their conspiracy, the nights of whispered conversations, the cryptic exchanges, the manipulations designed to remove him from their path, pressed on them, crushing the illusions they had nurtured. Joey's thoughts spiraled, each imagined outcome more horrifying than the last: exposure, humiliation, loss of control, the obliteration of everything he had built. Vanessa felt it too, a creeping, insidious awareness that the life she had constructed with Joey, built upon deception and ambition, was now dangling precariously over an abyss of Doug's making. The realization of betrayal was a living thing in the room, palpable and aggressive. Joey had once trusted Doug, confided in him, relied on him as an anchor in the chaotic currents of their environment. Now, that trust was inverted, a weapon turned inward, and every memory of camaraderie became a thorn in his consciousness. Vanessa's betrayal, on the other hand, had been more deliberate, more intricate, wrapped in layers of seduction, persuasion, and manipulation. Her ambition had blinded her to morality, and in that blindness, she had underestimated Doug. The collision of their errors now formed a perfect storm, and within it, Doug moved with a terrifying clarity, a man driven not by simple revenge but by the cold calculus of justice, reclamation, and a personal sense of right that brooked no compromise. The room itself seemed to respond to his presence. Shadows deepened, corners darkened, and the faintest movements took on an almost hallucinatory significance. Joey's hands shook as he instinctively reached for items that might serve as weapons or barriers, though he knew on some primal level they were futile. Vanessa's mind raced with contingency plans, schemes within schemes, yet every strategy dissolved the moment she imagined Doug's insight, his knowledge of their habits, his ability to anticipate every action they could take. It was not just fear that gripped them. It was the suffocating awareness of their own culpability, the understanding that their choices had cornered them into an inescapable narrative where they were no longer the orchestrators, but the prey. Doug's eyes, steady and calculating, cut through the room with an intensity that was almost tangible. He did not speak, did not gesture, did not need to, his mere presence conveyed the depth of his understanding and the inexorability of the reckoning to come. Joey and Vanessa could feel it, a slow burn of terror that ignited every nerve, every pulse, every thought. Decisions that once seemed trivial now bore consequences of profound magnitude. Every lie, every deception, every carefully constructed narrative they had created was being dissected, analyzed, and found wanting in the crucible of Doug's scrutiny. The psychological pressure was immense, pushing them toward reactions they had never anticipated. Panic, aggression, despair, and an almost instinctual drive for self-preservation that threatened to undo the very cohesion of their alliance. Within this pressure cooker, Joey felt a surge of anger that was inseparable from fear. He hated Doug for returning, for dismantling the illusions that had insulated him, for forcing him to confront truths he had long avoided. Yet beneath the anger lay something darker. Self-loathing, the recognition that his own ambition and choices had planted the seeds of this disaster. Vanessa felt the same, her mind churning with guilt and resentment in equal measure. She hated Doug for his intrusion, yes, but she also hated the part of herself that had allowed desire and greed to supersede judgment, that had entangled her in a scheme that now threatened to consume her entirely. Their inner turmoil became a physical sensation, a suffocating pressure that made the walls feel as though they were closing in, turning the space into a living, breathing entity of dread. Doug's methodical movements heightened the psychological tension. He moved through the room with the confidence of someone who had already anticipated every possible reaction, every escape, every deception. He did not need to act immediately. The anticipation, the certainty of his awareness, was enough to destabilize them. Joey's attempts at feigned composure faltered as he realized that Doug had not only discovered the scheme but understood their motivations, their fears, their weaknesses. Vanessa's calculations, meticulous and extensive, fell apart under the weight of Doug's perception. The power dynamic shifted completely. Where they had once believed themselves in control, now they existed under Doug's scrutiny, exposed and vulnerable, their every move scrutinized with unerring precision. The psychological warfare escalated further as Doug began to methodically unravel the environment itself. He highlighted inconsistencies, pointed out traces of evidence, manipulated light and shadow to enhance the feeling of confinement. Joey and Vanessa felt trapped, not by walls or locks, but by the inescapable truth of their own misdeeds. Each revelation, subtle or overt, acted like a blow, weakening their composure, forcing them into reactionary modes they could neither control nor predict. The air thickened with dread, an almost tactile manifestation of impending doom, pressing down on them until rational thought became a luxury they could no longer afford. In the midst of this psychological siege, their inner conflicts intensified. Joey oscillated between denial and acceptance, between fury and submission, struggling to reconcile his desire for survival with the unbearable weight of accountability. Vanessa, meanwhile, experienced waves of panic and vindictive aggression, contemplating retaliatory measures even as her mind recognized their futility. The duality of fear and moral reckoning created an internal friction so intense that it manifested in physical symptoms, trembling, nausea, rapid heartbeat, and an overwhelming sense of claustrophobia. Their shared terror also eroded the fragile trust between them, exposing the fragility of their alliance and the ease with which it could fracture under the pressure of Doug's calculated presence. Doug, fully aware of the psychological mechanisms at play, maintained a calm, almost surgical demeanor. He did not need to raise his voice or strike a blow, the mere certainty of his understanding acted as the executioner's hand, shaping the responses of Joey and Vanessa. Every fleeting thought of defiance or escape was anticipated, countered, rendered ineffective before it could materialize. The sense of inevitability became a cage, confining them not in physical space, but in the realm of their own guilt and fear, a prison constructed from the very misdeeds they had hoped would remain hidden. As time passed, the tension escalated to a fever pitch. Joey and Vanessa, once confident in their ability to manipulate outcomes, found themselves paralyzed by the complexity of the situation. Every decision became a trap, every potential move a potential betrayal of self or partner. They experienced the full psychological weight of consequences unmitigated by planning or foresight, a stark contrast to the controlled, strategic mindset they had relied upon throughout their plotting. The room became a theater of inner turmoil, a crucible in which fear, anger, and regret collided in unrelenting intensity. Doug's dominance in the space was not merely physical, it was moral and psychological. He embodied the reckoning they had sought to avoid, the tangible manifestation of their failures and misjudgments. Joey and Vanessa experienced an almost primal fear, an instinctive understanding that their survival depended not on external intervention, but on navigating the labyrinth of their own guilt and Doug's awareness, a challenge for which they were catastrophically unprepared. Their inner landscapes, once navigable and under their control, had become chaotic mazes of suspicion, panic, and moral conflict. In the end, the return of Doug did more than confront them with consequences. It forced Joey and Vanessa to confront the very nature of their ambitions, their desires, and the ethical compromises they had made along the way. The psychological terror he unleashed was not simply about punishment, it was about exposure, reflection, and the inexorability of truth. In the space of that room, the equilibrium they had relied upon collapsed entirely, leaving them raw, exposed, and fully subject to the judgment, silent, relentless, and omnipresent, of the one they had thought eliminated, the one who had returned not just to survive, but to dominate, to reclaim, and to dismantle every false construct they had erected. And in that suffocating, charged silence, Joey and Vanessa realized the horrifying reality. Doug's return had transformed their world, and there would be no escape from the psychological, moral, and emotional storm that now consumed them. Every heartbeat, every thought, every desperate plan was now a countdown, a reminder that their ambition and betrayal had invited an enemy whose patience, insight, and resolve were infinitely greater than their own. The nightmare was only beginning, and they were trapped at its center, facing a reckoning that would leave them forever changed. Or destroyed.